Deep in the Peruvian Amazon rainforest, the suffocating heat of the night wrapped around a small pitch-black hut where a person lay dying of a severe respiratory illness that modern medicine could not touch. There were no cardiac monitors, no sterile white lights, only the heavy, humid air and a terrifying stillness that hung over the desperate scene as the patient struggled for every single breath. Suddenly, an eerie, piercing chant known as an icaro cut through the darkness, vibrating against the wooden walls and the damp earth itself. The Shipibo Konibo healer was not offering a botanical potion or a chemical pill, but a relentless rhythmic sound oscillating at a precise frequency that seemed to pull the very sickness from the shadows of the room and out of the infected lungs. This unseen auditory weapon was not a display of primitive magic, but a highly calculated physical intervention rooted in acoustic physics. By generating specific sound pressure levels that resonated perfectly with the dimensions of the human chest cavity, the shaman was deploying targeted acoustic therapy, utilizing measurable decibel ranges to physically manipulate the internal state of a failing biological system. The chilling truth is that, long before the invention of electron microscopes or the establishment of modern clinical laboratories, these ancient indigenous cultures understood something terrifyingly simple about human existence. They knew that everything in the physical universe, including the iron-rich blood pumping in our veins and the dense calcium bones in our chests, is constantly vibrating at specific, measurable frequencies. It remains a profound mystery how they grasped this invisible reality without any modern diagnostic tools, relying only on a deep, almost unsettling connection to the natural world. They observed how water rippled under the force of thunder, felt the low-frequency purr of a jaguar at 25 hertz, and sensed that life was a continuous hum where absolute silence or stillness meant inevitable death. When that natural biological hum was broken by trauma or infection, the resulting clashing noise left the human body entirely vulnerable to cellular decay. This internal dissonance triggered severe stress responses, flooding the system with cortisol and suppressing the immune system, creating an environment where chaotic, irregular vibrations allowed disease to rapidly take hold and dismantle the structural integrity of the flesh. To fully understand this mechanism, you must realize how sound physically invades the human body, moving far beyond the auditory processing of what the ear can hear. A deep drumbeat or a sharp vocal chant does not just bounce off the skin. It forcefully pushes through our flesh, traveling instantly and violently through the water that makes up more than 60% of our total mass. These invisible waves crash into our bones and ripple through our internal organs, shaking us from the inside out. Because sound travels 4 times faster in water than in the air, reaching speeds of 1,480 meters per second, it is a total physical takeover, an unseen kinetic force that stimulates the vagus nerve, immediately altering our heart rate and changing the way our blood flows within seconds. This unsettling reality was not just known in the dense jungles of South America, but echoed across the globe in a chilling, undeniable pattern of ancient medical practice. Thousands of miles away, in the harsh and unforgiving Australian outback, entirely disconnected Aboriginal tribes were using the exact same invisible weapon against disease, employing the deep, droning acoustics of the Yidaki, or didgeridoo. Despite having absolutely no historical contact with each other, these ancient people independently discovered that specific low-frequency acoustic emissions could drastically alter the human condition. It creates a profound unease to realize that the most powerful medical tool of the ancient world, capable of clearing respiratory tracts and promoting bone tissue regeneration, was something you could not actually hold in your hands. That shared, unseen frequency linked the deep desert sands of Arnhem Land to the humid Amazonian jungle floor, forming a forgotten global web of human survival. Both cultures were intuitively tapping into planetary rhythms, mirroring the 7.83 Hz electromagnetic resonance of the Earth itself, creating a universal acoustic baseline that anchored the fragile human nervous system to the massive vibrating planet beneath their feet. Today, we have completely cut ourselves off from these natural grounding vibrations in our pursuit of advanced healthcare. If you walk into a modern hospital ward, you will find sterile, silent rooms where the only sounds are the cold, mechanical beeps of monitoring machines, the hum of fluorescent lighting, and the chaotic noise of medical equipment that offers absolutely no biological resonance to a healing body. We have trapped ourselves in a quiet, artificial world of concrete and steel, entirely disconnected from the raw, rhythmic pulse of the earth that once kept our ancestors alive for thousands of years. This modern isolation leaves a profound sense of emptiness, a physical void in our cellular environment where the low-frequency, healing vibrations of the natural world used to flow freely through our daily existence. Because of this severe environmental disconnect, we struggle to grasp the ancient, unsettling diagnosis of what it actually means to be biologically sick. Indigenous healers did not look at a dying person and see only invading germs, microscopic bacteria, or isolated viral pathogens, but rather they examined the entire structural integrity of the bioenergetic field, looking for disruptions in the fundamental frequencies of the patient. Instead, they saw a human body that had tragically fallen out of its natural, healthy rhythm, much like a complex symphony instrument playing a broken, chaotic song. They viewed a failing organ not merely as damaged tissue, but as a pool of dark, stagnant energy that had lost its mechanical coherence and desperately needed to be shaken back into harmony before it dragged the rest of the biological system down into total failure. The chant was the exact tuning fork required to shatter that dense stagnation and forcefully command the failing organ to remember its original, healthy tempo. Through the physics principle of sympathetic resonance, the intense vibration of the healer's vocal cords forced the diseased, sluggish cells into the exact same vibratory rate, using the immense power of sound waves to physically override the chaotic frequencies of the illness. The most shocking turning point in this forgotten history is that modern quantum physics now entirely agrees with the fundamental worldview of these ancient shamans. Science has finally proven the unsettling truth that solid matter is nothing more than an illusion, and that every single thing you see and touch is just vibrating energy at a subatomic level, governed by the exact same acoustic principles utilized in the jungle. It is a chilling vindication of the people we once called primitive, proving they held the ultimate secret to human biology all along. They knew that if you can control the vibration, whether through a targeted chant or a deep rhythmic drum beat, you can control the very fabric of life itself, literally vibrating a patient back from the terrifying brink of death. Long before the first microscope was built, or the first sound wave was measured in a laboratory, ancient healers had already mapped the hidden frequencies of the human body. They possessed an eerie, unexplained knowledge of how vibration interacted with bone, tissue, and blood. Without modern instruments, these isolated communities understood that every organ had its own natural rhythm, and they knew exactly how to use their voices to find where that rhythm was broken. This wisdom was not written in textbooks or debated in sterile academic halls, but was instead passed down through generations of quiet observation and deep connection to the natural world. Elders taught the young how to listen to the subtle hum of life itself, training them to detect the microscopic tremors of sickness long before physical symptoms ever appeared on the surface. It was a profound mastery of physics, born entirely in the wild. This ancient mastery of unseen forces was a profound scientific achievement, yet it was destined to collide with a world that demanded physical proof. When early colonizers and foreign doctors first encountered these vocal healing rituals, they did not see a complex medical system based on frequency and vibration. Instead, driven by a chilling arrogance, they dismissed the carefully practiced chants as primitive howling and superstitious nonsense. They viewed the human body as a simple machine of meat and bone, completely blind to the delicate web of energy that the indigenous healers were carefully repairing. The tragedy of this forced ignorance left a devastating mark on history. Sacred songs that had cured illnesses for thousands of years were outlawed, mocked, and violently suppressed by those who believed medicine could only come from a glass bottle or a steel blade. The true mechanics of sound healing were buried under decades of prejudice, leaving generations of native practitioners to hide their life-saving knowledge in the shadows just to survive. Despite the brutal suppression that nearly erased these ancient medical practices, the sacred rhythms refused to be completely silenced. To understand the raw power of this surviving knowledge, you must travel deep into the dense, suffocating heat of the Amazon rainforest. Here, the jungle itself is a wall of overwhelming noise, a chaotic symphony of buzzing insects, calling birds and rustling leaves that never truly sleeps. It is in this relentless environment that the Amazonian shaman begins the grueling, step-by-step preparation required for a traditional healing ceremony. The preparation is an intense physical and mental trial, demanding days of severe fasting and deep isolation from the rest of the tribe. The healer must empty their own body and mind, stripping away every distraction until they are completely attuned to the vibrating energy of the forest around them. Only when they have reached this fragile, hollowed-out state can they safely channel the massive sonic forces needed to pull sickness from a dying patient. This grueling isolation prepares the healer to receive something entirely outside the bounds of modern understanding. Among the Shipibo people of the Amazon, the core of their medical practice revolves around hauntingly complex melodies known as icaros. The chilling mystery of these sacred songs is that the healers insist they do not invent them, write them, or even learn them from other humans. Instead, they claim these highly specific, mathematical rhythms are taught directly to them by the spirits of the plants themselves during their deep isolation in the jungle. When you look at the traditional artwork of the Shipibo, you see endless, dizzying geometric patterns that look exactly like the visual representations of sound waves recorded by modern computers. The healers say these patterns are the actual visual shapes of the icaros, a physical map of the songs they use to rewrite the broken energy of a sick person. It is an unsettling realization that they have been painting the literal architecture of sound for centuries. These geometric maps of sacred sound are only brought to life when the sun disappears and the true work begins. The actual healing ceremony is a terrifying, disorienting experience, always held in the suffocating grip of total, pitch-black darkness. The fire is extinguished, leaving the patient completely blind, stripping away their sense of space and forcing their brain to rely entirely on what they can hear and feel. In this heavy, silent void, the anticipation builds into a quiet dread, as the boundaries between the physical body and the unseen world begin to dissolve. Suddenly, the shaman's voice pierces the blackness, starting as a low, guttural hum that seems to vibrate from the very floorboards before rising into a piercing, otherworldly whistle. The sound bounces erratically off the walls of the unseen room, creating a visceral, physical pressure that wraps around the patient like a heavy blanket. In the dark, the voice becomes a living, breathing entity, moving through the space with terrifying precision. Within this pitch-black sensory deprivation, the voice transforms from a simple chant into a highly calibrated medical instrument. The shaman uses the icaro in a precise, almost surgical manner, actively scanning the patient's body with sound just like a modern ultrasound machine. They rapidly change the pitch, tone, and rhythm of their song, listening closely for the moment the sound wave hits a block of dark, stagnant energy hidden deep within the organs. When the voice finds the sickness, the tone shifts dramatically, locking onto the discordant frequency of the disease. Once the stagnant energy is located, the healer weaponizes the song, driving intense, vibrating notes directly into the affected area to shatter the blockage. They use the sheer force of the sound wave to break apart the illness, pulling the dark energy up and out of the patient's body through a violent, physical purge. It is a brutal, exhausting process where the song literally wrestles the sickness out of the flesh. This violent extraction leaves both the patient and the healer drained, forever changed by the sheer physical impact of the vibrating chant. The suffocating darkness of the remote jungle hut is suddenly broken not by a flash of light, but by a violent physical reaction to a precise acoustic trigger. As the Shipibo shaman forces their icaro song to hit a specific, piercing frequency, the patient's entire body begins to shake uncontrollably on the dirt floor. This is the purge, a terrifying and physically exhausting biological event where the identified illness is violently forced out of the human system. Sweating, intense trembling, and sudden gastric expulsion take over the patient, all triggered entirely by the relentless vibration of the human voice pushing the sickness from the deep cellular tissues of the body. Once that toxic physiological energy is finally expelled, the exhausted body is left dangerously open and vulnerable to the unseen pathogens of the spiritual world. The healer must immediately change the structure of their song, shifting away from a harsh sound that tears away sickness to a highly structured melody designed to build an impenetrable shield. They use their voice to weave a complex protective grid directly back into the patient's weakened energy field. The ancient Shipibo belief dictates that this new song physically draws a rigid geometric pattern of sound around the person, surgically sealing the microscopic gaps where the illness once lived and permanently locking cellular health back into place. In the heavy, humid air of the Peruvian Amazon, that invisible shield of sonic architecture is often the only thing standing between a fragile human life and the creeping biological threats of the deep jungle. It is a vital line of defense forged entirely through the calculated mastery of breath, pitch, and rhythmic repetition. But this intricate, highly technical system of sonic surgery is quietly disappearing before modern science can fully document its mechanics. The true master shamans, the aging elders who hold the exact memory of the precise frequencies required to cure specific neurological and physical diseases, are passing away one by one in isolated river communities. With every indigenous elder who takes their final breath, an entire mental library of ancient, life-saving botanical songs vanishes from the earth forever. There are no written notes, no sheet music, and no digital audio files to save these specific melodies, leaving a devastating hole in a medical tradition that took thousands of years of trial and error to perfect. The creeping silence left behind by these dying master healers means that potential acoustic cures for complex psychological ailments we barely understand are rapidly slipping into the shadows. Without the elders to pass down the exact vocal techniques, centuries of highly specialized medicinal chanting are simply dissolving into the dense foliage, completely lost to time. What makes this cultural loss even more haunting for anthropologists and medical researchers is the unsettled mystery of where these precise acoustic formulas actually came from. The remaining elders firmly insist they did not invent the complex melodies, but rather learned them directly from the psychoactive plants themselves during months of isolated fasting in the wilderness. It is a profound and deeply unsettling concept for the modern, empirically driven mind to grasp. We are left to wonder how a human being could sit quietly in the dirt for weeks on end and somehow extract a complex, disease-curing rhythm directly from the chemical signature of a silent, motionless jungle vine like ayahuasca. That seemingly impossible biological connection between vibrating human vocal cords and the quiet, living pulse of the rainforest remains one of the deepest unresolved mysteries of the Amazon basin. It suggests an ancient, highly evolved method of communicating with the natural world that modern medical technology has absolutely no framework to measure, replicate, or comprehend. Halfway across the globe, another ancient group of people found an entirely different way to harness the raw physical power of acoustic vibration. The investigative trail now shifts away from the dense, wet canopy of South America and moves directly into the brutal, sun-baked, and utterly unforgiving expanse of the remote Australian outback. Here, surviving in one of the harshest and most isolated environments on Earth required significantly more than just finding scarce water and temporary shelter. The Aboriginal people developed a profound, scientifically fascinating understanding of sonic energy, deliberately using deep, earth-shaking low frequencies to theoretically accelerate the healing of broken bones and repair deeply traumatized human spirits. In this scorched and desolate landscape, targeted sound became an absolutely essential tool for human survival and medical intervention. These low-frequency vibrations were echoing across the vast stretches of red dirt for tens of thousands of years, long before the rest of the civilized world even knew this massive southern continent existed. The sheer chronological age of this indigenous culture is almost overwhelming for modern historians to fully consider. For an estimated 60,000 years, Aboriginal Australians have maintained an unbroken, continuous cultural connection to their ancestral lands, passing down acoustic healing techniques through the longest surviving continuous human civilization on the planet. This immense stretch of uninterrupted time carries a heavy investigative weight, representing an oral chain of acoustic medical knowledge, passed down through countless generations without a single break. Their sophisticated understanding of the Earth and its resonant frequencies is not theoretical, but rather a deeply ingrained ancestral memory practically written into their very DNA. Standing in the terrifyingly vast emptiness of the outback, surrounded by ancient rock formations and endless horizons, one can almost feel the ghosts of that ancient wisdom. The low, rhythmic thrum of their traditional healing practices seems to remain perpetually trapped, vibrating just beneath the cracked surface of the dry desert earth. The absolute centerpiece of this ancient sonic healing practice is a massive wooden instrument traditionally known as the yidaki, or the didgeridoo, and its initial creation is as unsettling as it is entirely natural. It is not meticulously carved by human hands, but rather hollowed out in the pitch dark by swarms of blind termites eating through the dense core of a living eucalyptus branch, creating a perfectly tuned acoustic chamber built by the earth itself. In the remote stretches of the Australian outback, a unique and eerie instrument was born not from human hands, but from the earth itself. The yidaki, known to many as the didgeridoo, begins its life as a simple eucalyptus branch. Deep within the wood, swarms of termites hollow out the core, eating away the center until they leave behind a perfect natural acoustic chamber. It is a haunting thought that the earth, through tiny insects, crafted a tool capable of producing such profound and unsettling power. When played by a master, the yidaki unleashes a physical force that is almost terrifying to experience. It produces ultra-low frequencies, deep rumbling sound waves that travel straight through the air and crash into the human body. These heavy vibrations do not just hit the eardrum. They bypass the ears entirely and sink directly into the flesh and bone of anyone sitting near it. The musician uses a relentless technique known as circular breathing, inhaling through the nose while continuously pushing air out through the mouth. This creates an unbroken, droning vibration that never pauses for a breath, sometimes lasting for hours. The sheer force of this continuous sound physically rattles the skeletal structure of the listener, vibrating through their chest cavity and down into the marrow of their bones. This bone-shaking frequency was never meant just for music, but served as a raw physical tool for survival. For thousands of years, this intense vibration was directed at the sick and the injured with surgical precision. Imagine a hunter returning to the camp with a shattered leg, or a warrior whose spirit had been torn by the brutal realities of survival in the harsh desert. They would be placed directly in front of the yidaki, allowing the deep, booming resonance to wash over their broken body. The healer would move the end of the wooden tube over the exact site of the injury, blowing those heavy sound waves directly into the fracture or the wound. The physical vibration acted like an invisible massage, increasing blood flow, relaxing tight muscles, and stimulating the body's natural repair systems. It was a visceral, hands-off surgery performed entirely through the weight of sound. The raw impact of these sonic waves literally shook the trauma out of the body, accelerating the healing process in a way that modern science is only just beginning to understand. Today, a visit to a high-tech sports medicine clinic might reveal a shocking parallel to this ancient practice. Doctors now routinely use low-frequency ultrasound devices to speed up the healing of serious bone fractures and muscle tears. They apply a machine that shoots deep sound waves into the injury, forcing the cells to vibrate and repair themselves much faster than they would on their own. It is a chilling and profound realization that modern medicine has only recently discovered what the Aboriginal people have known for tens of thousands of years. Long before electricity, clinical trials, or modern hospitals, indigenous healers were performing targeted ultrasound therapy using nothing more than a hollowed-out log and the power of human breath. But the deep hum of the yidaki was never viewed merely as a physical treatment. To the Aboriginal people, this intense sound is a vital bridge to the dream time, the unseen, eternal dimension where all creation began and where the ancestors still reside. The vibration is believed to be the actual voice of the earth, echoing from a time before human memory. When a sick person is bathed in this sound, they are not just receiving physical vibrations, they are being reconnected to the very fabric of the universe. The healer uses the drone to pull the patient's spirit out of its state of illness and align it back with the ancient perfect rhythm of the dream time, restoring balance to a shattered soul. This sacred alignment of body and spirit relies entirely on the unbroken chain of ancient knowledge carried in the minds of the people. This brings us to a terrifying realization about the fragility of this ancient wisdom. Across the vast red expanse of the Australian outback, there are no written maps, no ancient libraries, and no stone monuments to hold the history of the people. Instead, the entire map of the world, the location of every waterhole, and the secrets of every healing plant are held entirely in memory and sound. These are the songlines, invisible pathways that crisscross the continent, kept alive only by the continuous singing of the people. For over 40,000 years, this unbroken chain of songs has been passed from mouth to ear, generation after generation, forming a living, breathing encyclopedia of human survival. As long as the songs were sung, the world remained intact. But if the voices were ever silenced, the map would vanish, and the ancient connection to the earth would be lost forever. That terrifying possibility became a dark, horrifying reality during the era of the Stolen Generations. In a brutal attempt to erase this ancient culture, government policies forced thousands of Aboriginal children to be ripped from the arms of their families. They were taken far away from their homes, forbidden to speak their native languages, and severely punished if they tried to sing the songs of their ancestors. This was not just the theft of children. It was the deliberate destruction of a 40,000-year-old library of human knowledge. The invisible song lines that held the world together were violently broken, leaving a devastating void where profound wisdom and healing traditions once thrived. The trauma of this forced silence echoed through the generations, shattering the spirits of those left behind. The tragic severing of these ancient sonic roots left a deep, lingering wound that entire communities are still fighting to heal today. Across oceans and continents, far from the shattered songlines of the outback, another sound echoes through human history. It is the steady, undeniable pulse of the drum from the freezing taiga of Siberia to the dense canopy of the Amazon basin. This simple instrument holds a power that crosses every cultural boundary, speaking a language older than words. The secret to this power lies in our very beginnings. Long before we take our first breath, the heavy, rhythmic thud of a mother's heartbeat is the entire world to an unborn child floating in amniotic fluid. The drum perfectly mimics this ancient, comforting rhythm, tricking our deepest biological instincts into feeling safe and connected to a much larger pulse. Because the drum echoes that first pulse of life, its steady strike commands our physical bodies to fall in line, stripping away our modern psychological defenses. Clinical measurements show that within minutes of exposure to a rhythmic bass frequency, human blood pressure drops, cortisol levels plummet, and the autonomic nervous system completely surrenders its fight-or-flight response. There is something deeply unsettling about how easily our minds surrender to a steady beat. We like to believe we are in complete control of our thoughts, but acoustic neurology proves otherwise. When a drum begins to play, the human auditory cortex and motor cortex immediately lock together, leaving the brain completely defenseless against this invisible acoustic force. This strange surrender is driven by a chilling biological loophole known as entrainment. First observed by physicist Christian Huygens in 1665, this principle dictates that without our permission, our brainwaves automatically begin to sync with the repetitive strike of the drum, abandoning their natural rhythm to lock onto the external sound. The mind becomes a prisoner to the beat, pulled along by a physical force it cannot resist. This silent hijacking of our brainwaves by simple rhythm opens a doorway to altered states of reality that most people never experience. By forcing a systematic shutdown of the prefrontal cortex, the drum initiates a profound sensory gating effect, effectively blinding the conscious mind to the outside world and turning its entire focus violently inward. The biological takeover happens with mathematical precision. Indigenous healers discovered thousands of years ago that striking a drum at a very specific speed fundamentally changes how the human brain operates. Modern electroencephalogram readings confirm that a steady rhythm of roughly 4.5 beats per second acts as a master key to unlock the deepest vaults of the human nervous system. At this exact speed, the brain is forced out of its normal, waking state of alertness. The rapid-fire beta brain waves of daily life, vibrating between 14 and 30 hertz, are violently slowed down, plunging the listener deep into the heavy, hypnotic frequencies of a theta state. It is a calculated, step-by-step shutdown of the conscious, analytical mind. By forcing the brain into this vulnerable theta frequency, which normally only occurs during deep REM sleep or intense memory consolidation, ancient practitioners created a reliable method to bypass the physical senses entirely. The drum effectively silences the default mode network, stripping away the ego and leaving the subconscious mind completely exposed to the healer's influence. Entering this shamanic trance is not a peaceful meditation, but a terrifying and awe-inspiring freefall. As the drum beats on, the solid world begins to dissolve. Listeners in clinical anthropological studies describe a sudden, chilling loss of physical sensation, accompanied by massive pupil dilation and a sharp drop in body temperature, as if the boundaries of their own skin are melting away into the dark. The sheer weight of the mind detaching from the physical body is overwhelming. Anthropologist Michael Harner documented this phenomenon extensively, noting that it feels like stepping off a cliff in the pitch black, trusting nothing but the relentless low-frequency thud of the drum to keep you from disappearing completely into the void. It is a profound, terrifying surrender to the unknown. Once the mind is completely untethered from the physical realm, the true, perilous work of the healing ceremony begins. The practitioner is now operating in a severe dissociative state, entirely disconnected from earthly pain or distraction, allowing them to perform intense psychological interventions, soul retrievals, and the extraction of deep-seated traumas that modern medicine would classify as severe psychosomatic illnesses. For many Native American healers, as well as the Tungus shamans of Siberia, this deep trance is merely the starting point of a harrowing spirit journey. The shaman does not just listen to the drum, they use it as a literal vehicle. Their consciousness leaves their physical body behind, riding the invisible acoustic waves of the drum beat out into the shadows of an unseen, dangerous world. It is a chilling concept to grasp. While their empty shell remains in the physical space, their spirit travels through hidden dimensions, searching through the darkness for the root cause of an illness. They venture into hostile psychological realms where logic does not exist, risking severe dissociation and their own sanity to find answers hidden in the architecture of the human soul, as the healer's spirit drifts through these terrifying, formless landscapes. The relentless rhythm echoing from the physical world remains their only tether to reality. The heavy, resonant frequencies of a high drum, which can push past 100 decibels, vibrate directly through the floor and into the bones of the practitioner, serving as a physical anchor while their mind navigates the abyss. The return journey is the most dangerous part of the entire ordeal. The healer must fiercely hold on to that distant rhythm to navigate their way back through the void. Often an assistant will initiate a specific callback beat, abruptly changing the tempo, to act as a glowing thread in the pitch black, pulling the wandering consciousness back to its waiting body. They do not return empty-handed. They bring back the cure, which might be a lost fragment of the patient's soul or a profound realization about a hidden sickness. The physical striking of the drum, driving the healer back into their waking state, is the only thing that ensures this vital unseen medicine makes it across the threshold into the physical world. Because these ancient cures were pulled from the unseen world using nothing but rhythm, the very act of beating a drum soon became a profound threat to those who could not understand its power. By the late 19th century, the United States government recognized this psychological authority, passing the 183 Code of Indian Offenses to criminalize the medicine man and silence the drum forever. Then comes the sudden, deafening silence. When the relentless beating of the healer's drum finally stops after hours of continuous striking at 4.5 beats per second, the sudden absence of sound hits the body like a physical blow. The patient's nervous system jolts, suddenly unmoored from the deep, steady acoustic rhythm that had artificially anchored their brainwaves in the dark space of the ceremonial lodge. In that heavy, breathless quiet, the patient is left fundamentally changed at a biological level. The room feels intensely still, but inside the neural pathways and the circulatory system, a profound shift has already occurred. Cortisol levels have plummeted, and they have returned from the unseen world carrying a heavy truth that their physical body has been systematically rewired by the sheer calculated force of sustained acoustic vibration. This raw, undeniable neurological power did not go unnoticed by those who sought to conquer indigenous lands during the 19th century. When European colonizers and foreign governments witnessed the deep collective trance and the unbreakable psychological unity forged by the medicine drum, they did not seek cultural music. They saw a terrifying, uncontainable threat to their political authority and a barrier to assimilation. What followed was a brutal and systematic campaign to silence the heartbeat of indigenous cultures across North America. Federal laws, such as the 1883 Code of Indian Offenses in the United States, were passed to ban native drumming entirely, stripping communities of their most vital medical and spiritual tool. Medicine drums were outlawed, confiscated by government agents, and burned in public squares, leaving a devastating void where profound healing once lived. The desolate silence that subsequently fell over the conquered villages and reservations was a heavy, suffocating blanket of federal control. Without the acoustic foundation of their medical ceremonies, Tribes lost their primary mechanism for treating trauma, resolving internal conflicts, and maintaining the physiological health of their people in the face of rapid, devastating cultural erasure. But a biological rhythm that has lived in the human nervous system for millennia cannot be easily erased by ink on government paper. These sacred therapeutic beats were immediately forced underground, hidden away from the eyes of the military and federal agents who sought to destroy them. Indigenous practitioners found desperate, ingenious ways to keep their acoustic healing traditions alive in the shadows of the reservation system. They carefully disguised their ancient trance-inducing rhythms within the acceptable Christian hymns, brass band marches, and European folk songs brought by the invaders. By masking the true neurological purpose of the underlying beat, traditional healers ensured that the fundamental frequency of cultural survival continued to pulse beneath the surface of everyday life, hidden in plain sight from suspicious missionaries. This desperate, calculated act of preservation ensured that the ancient healing frequencies survived the darkest chapters of colonial history. By embedding their medical knowledge into newly adopted musical forms, indigenous elders succeeded in quietly passing the blueprint for acoustic therapy from one generation to the next, waiting for a time when the drums could legally sound again. Today, the lingering echo of that historical suppression still haunts our modern, overstimulated minds, leaving the general public with a deeply buried, unspoken craving for rhythmic entrainment. We live in a digitized world completely disconnected from the natural acoustic cycles of the earth, yet our nervous systems still desperately search for that lost grounding pulse to regulate our chaotic brainwaves. It is the unsettling biological reason why millions of people still flock to massive electronic music festivals, standing dangerously close to giant subwoofer speakers just to feel the heavy, repetitive 120 beats per minute bass vibrate directly through their chest cavities. Without realizing it, modern crowds are instinctively trying to recreate the ancient communal trance of the medicine drum, blindly searching for an acoustic cure to the frantic, fragmented noise of modern life. That undeniable global hunger for deep physical vibration points to a physiological truth older than any wooden or hide-covered instrument we have ever built. The human body is inherently wired to respond to sound, and the original source of that acoustic medicine did not require a drumstick or a hollowed-out tree trunk to alter the state of the human mind. Long before the first animal skin was ever stretched over a wooden frame to create a drum, the most intimate and potentially dangerous acoustic instrument of all was the human voice. Specific indigenous chanting techniques turned the delicate vocal cords into a highly targeted, vibrational weapon against physical illness, using the resonance of the chest and skull to project healing frequencies directly into a patient. By pulling massive amounts of breath deep into the diaphragm and forcing it out through tightly controlled, constricted passages in the larynx, early healers learned to generate specific audio frequencies that could shatter the grip of psychological and physical disease. It is a precise, mechanical manipulation of air and human tissue, effectively turning the healer's own body into a living, breathing tuning fork. The sheer physical force of this sustained vocal projection requires a mastery of the lungs, diaphragm, and throat muscles that takes decades of grueling practice to perfect. A poorly trained practitioner attempting these extreme vocalizations risks severe damage to their own vocal folds, proving that this ancient medical practice is as physically demanding as any modern surgical discipline. Nowhere is this extreme vocal mastery more chillingly evident than in the frozen, desolate landscapes of the Canadian Arctic and Siberia, home to the otherworldly mystery of indigenous throat singing. In the endless, isolating dark of the deep winter, the complex acoustic sounds that emerge from these highly trained singers defy standard musical theory and often do not even seem human to the untrained ear. It is an unsettling, deeply haunting auditory experience to hear a single person produce two distinct, mathematically related pitches at the exact same time. A low, guttural drone rumbles from the false vocal cords like shifting tectonic plates, while a sharp, high-frequency whistle dances directly above it, creating a complex, interfering web of sound waves that vibrates deep within the listener's skeletal structure. This dual frequency creates a mesmerizing, hypnotic state that forces the human mind to surrender to the harsh, unforgiving reality of the freezing environment. By producing overtone frequencies that directly stimulate the vagus nerve, These throat singers can induce a rapid state of deep relaxation, lowering the heart rate and conserving vital body heat during the most brutal Arctic storms. But wielding this kind of targeted sonic power demands a grueling, often painful physical sacrifice from the traditional healer. The sheer physiological toll of vibrating the cranial bones and forcing such intense, unnatural acoustic frequencies through the respiratory system leaves the singer completely drained, pushing their own body to the absolute edge of human endurance just to pull a dying patient back from the brink. The sheer physical force required to sustain these deep guttural sounds for 8 to 10 consecutive hours is brutally punishing on the human body. Healers push themselves to the absolute limit of cardiovascular exhaustion, their own skulls and jawbones vibrating violently as they force heavy, low-frequency resonance out into the pitch-black darkness. It is a grueling, painful reality where the singer literally sacrifices their own physical safety, turning their raw vocal cords into a relentless tearing engine of continuous acoustic vibration. This agonizing physical sacrifice is the hidden, unspoken cost of the cure. Shamanic practitioners often endure severe dehydration, ruptured blood vessels in the throat, and dangerous spikes in blood pressure just to maintain the necessary acoustic frequency. They willingly absorb this immense biological trauma, trading their own vital energy and immediate health to pull a dying patient back from the absolute brink of total physiological collapse. The brilliant underlying biology behind this punishing low-frequency chanting remained a complete mystery to modern science for centuries. Clinical researchers at the National Institutes of Health have only recently mapped how these specific deep rumbling sound waves, often sustained between 40 and 100 hertz, travel directly through the chest cavity and the neck to mechanically stimulate the vagus nerve. This thick, wandering bundle of cranial fibers acts as the master control switch for the entire human parasympathetic nervous system. When activated by the heavy rhythmic vibration of a sustained chant, it forces the heavily stressed nervous system to immediately shut down its panicked fight-or-flight response, halting the production of cortisol and forcing the body to switch over to a deep, cellular state of rest, immune activation, and rapid tissue repair. By physically vibrating this crucial nerve pathway through targeted vocal resonance, ancient singers were effectively hacking the human autonomic nervous system without ever stepping foot inside a modern clinical laboratory. They achieved measurable spikes in heart rate variability and massive reductions in systemic inflammation, utilizing nothing but the raw, unyielding power of the human airway to manually override a patient's failing biology. The resulting physical shift inside a severely sick body is a shocking, observable turning point in the timeline of survival. The exact moment the vagus nerve is successfully triggered by the relentless driving sound, the sheer physiological terror and compounding stress of a critical illness finally begin to break. The patient stops hyperventilating, their core temperature stabilizes, and the desperate, exhaustive fight for oxygen suddenly transforms into a steady, rhythmic intake of air. A chilling, sudden drop in resting heart rate, sometimes plummeting by 20 to 30 beats per minute, washes over the exhausted patient. Tight, agonizing muscle spasms finally release their vice-like grip on the skeleton, and an immediate heavy wave of deep, uncontrollable calm floods the entire circulatory system, actively suppressing pain receptors and clearing the biological pathway for true aggressive cellular healing to finally begin. This sudden, profound biological surrender leaves the patient completely exposed, their natural defensive barriers stripped away, rendering them highly receptive and ready for the next critical phase of the midnight ritual. With the physical body finally subdued and the frantic mind silenced, the environment shifts from a focus on internal biological stabilization to actively confronting the external unseen forces driving the deadly affliction. The healer then reaches into the darkness for an instrument that naive modern observers often dismiss as a simple, primitive toy. The carefully constructed rattle, typically fashioned from dried gourds and filled with dense seeds or jagged quartz crystals, is brought out, not to keep a simple musical beat, but to serve as a highly precise, high-frequency acoustic broom designed to manipulate the very air in the room. Indigenous healers across the Americas use the sharp, aggressive, high-frequency sound of the rattle to violently sweep away the unseen, lingering remnants of profound sickness. The rapid, piercing noise, often spiking above 4,000 hertz, cuts sharply through the dense, humid air of the enclosure, acting as a literal sonic blade that systematically slices away the lingering heavy shadows of infection and despair clinging to the patient. The relentless rhythmic shaking of the rattle creates a dense, impenetrable wall of acoustic pressure that physically pushes back against the crushing, invisible weight of the disease. This localized manipulation of sound waves generates a highly pressurized environment inside the healing space, forcing a palpable shift in the atmospheric density that everyone present can actually feel pressing against their eardrums and vibrating against their skin. This aggressive acoustic sweeping brings us to the eerie, unsettling concept of stagnant energy, a chilling anthropological mystery that sits at the very core of these ancient medical practices. Long before modern epidemiology could isolate and map a microscopic virus under a lens, indigenous healers accurately perceived severe illness as a dark, heavy, and very physical presence lurking aggressively inside the confines of the sick room. They saw terminal disease not as a random, unfortunate failure of the mortal flesh, but as dark, sticky, parasitic cobwebs clinging directly to a person's vital spirit. These unseen, suffocating threads of sickness systematically wrap around a vulnerable victim, silently choking off their essential life force and draining their biological reserves long before the very first physical symptoms of fever or decay ever manifest on the surface of the skin. The haunting, objective reality of these sticky, spiritual cobwebs of illness was extensively documented in 1968 by field anthropologists studying the Shipibo people deep within the Peruvian Amazon. These researchers recorded veteran healers describing a terrifying, invisible tar-like sludge coating the organs of the dying, a toxic residue that had to be physically scraped away with high-frequency sound, leaving modern science with deeply unresolved questions about what these ancient medical masters were actually witnessing in the dark. Scraping away this dense, malignant dark energy exposes the presiding shaman to a terrifying, potentially lethal occupational risk. They are not simply waving a wooden rattle blindly in the air. They are intentionally stepping directly into the volatile path of a dangerous, unseen, and highly contagious spiritual force that actively wants to survive and spread to the nearest available living host. There is a chilling universal belief among these tribes that when a healer violently breaks up this dark energy with targeted sound, the sickness does not just magically vanish into the ether. It desperately searches for a new host, and the shaman routinely absorbs the brutal concussive impact of the illness directly into their own nervous system, willingly taking on violent tremors, sudden fevers, and immense suffering to pull the lethal infection away from the dying patient. This heavy, incredibly dangerous biological burden means the healer must violently and immediately purge the freshly absorbed sickness from their own compromised system before the long night is over. If they fail to expel this toxic energetic sludge through intense physical vomiting, aggressive tobacco smoke cleansing, or frantic, specialized vocal expulsions, the practitioner risks succumbing to the exact same fatal disease they just cured. To prevent the displaced disease from permanently taking hold in either body, the sharp, rapid clicking sounds of the dried rattle are deployed like thousands of tiny, invisible acoustic hammers. These aggressive high frequencies are meticulously directed at the patient's major organs to completely shatter the dense, stagnant pools of hidden illness lurking deep inside the cellular tissues, ensuring every last microscopic fragment of the deadly affliction is eradicated before the morning sun finally rises. The high frequencies generated by the traditional gourd rattle do significantly more than just fill the air with rhythmic noise. They act as a measurable physical force against unseen physiological blockages. Each sharp, rapid click strikes the air like a tiny, invisible hammer, generating localized acoustic pressure waves that relentlessly pound against those dense, stagnant pools of illness festering deep inside the fascial tissue. As those dark, hardened blockages finally shatter under the sustained acoustic pressure of the rattling, the physical body is left temporarily vulnerable, demanding a complete and immediate reset of its internal neurological rhythm. The sudden release of tension forces the parasympathetic nervous system into overdrive, dropping cortisol levels rapidly and forcing the cellular structure to reorganize itself without the burden of that stagnant energy. This ancient method of clearing out sickness forces us to confront a deeply unsettling truth about the fundamental nature of our own biological existence. We are heavily conditioned by modern medicine to see ourselves as solid objects constructed entirely of dense meat, heavy bone, and flowing blood. But quantum physics dictates that this perceived solidity is nothing more than a highly convincing, comforting illusion. Beneath the visible surface of our skin, we are actually complex, vibrating fields of electrical and acoustic energy, constantly humming with a hidden baseline frequency. When you realize that every single cell in your body carries an electrical charge of roughly -50 millivolts, waiting to be influenced by outside forces, the raw power of a simple, sustained sound suddenly becomes terrifyingly real. This invisible grid of bioelectrical energy courses through our nervous system and connective tissues at every single moment, reacting instantaneously to every mechanical vibration in the surrounding environment. The collagen fibers that make up our bones and fascia actually exhibit a piezoelectric effect, meaning they physically generate their own electrical currents whenever they are compressed or struck by the pressure of an incoming sound wave. To truly understand this invisible reality, we must leave the ancient smoke-filled forests behind and step directly into the cold, sterile light of the modern science laboratory. Here, far removed from the spiritual rituals of indigenous healers, 20th century researchers finally began to rigorously test the raw physical power that concentrated sound waves can exert over solid matter and liquid dynamics. Researchers set up simple, highly controlled experiments, placing ordinary granular materials like fine quartz sand or pools of distilled water onto thin brass and steel metal plates. Then, they hooked those conductive plates up to precision audio generators, slowly turning a calibrated dial to blast the resting materials with pure, isolated acoustic tones to see exactly what would happen under intense vibrational stress. As the frequency of the sound increased incrementally in the lab, reaching upwards of 1,000 hertz, the chaotic piles of loose sand began to violently shift and dance across the metal surface. The acoustic pressure created standing waves across the brass, forcing the grains to bounce wildly into the air as the invisible vibrations physically pushed against the mass of the solid particles. What happened next birthed the profound and mysterious science formerly known today as cymatics, a term coined by Swiss physician Hans Jenny in 1967. The instant a specific continuous tone was played through the amplifier, the completely random grains of sand suddenly snapped together, instantly forming perfect, incredibly complex geometric patterns across the entire surface of the vibrating metal plate. It is a deeply chilling moment to witness, as lifeless silica dust instantly organizes itself into intricate mandalas, sharply defined stars, and flawless concentric spirals without any physical manipulation. The sound was literally giving shape to the physical world, utilizing specific mathematical frequencies to carve perfect structural order out of total, unpredictable chaos in a fraction of a single second. These perfect geometric shapes remain entirely stable and completely motionless for exactly as long as the specific acoustic note is held by the generator, proving definitively that physical form is completely dependent on underlying vibration. The sand particles simply gather in the dead zones, or nodal lines where the sound waves cancel each other out, perfectly mapping the invisible geometry of the audio frequency. Watching these intricate cymatic patterns shift and morph creates a deep sense of scientific awe, heavily mixed with a creeping, undeniable dread regarding our own physical stability. When the frequency changes even slightly, shifting just 10 hertz higher, the beautiful star pattern immediately shatters back into a chaotic blur, only to violently snap into a completely new, mathematically perfect shape a moment later. This constant, rapid cycle of structural destruction and creation forces a terrifying question upon anyone watching the experiment unfold. If a simple, isolated sound wave can instantly organize or completely shatter solid matter resting on a metal plate, what exactly is that same frequency doing to a living human body that is constructed of roughly 60 to 70% water? The ripples of those incoming sound waves travel through our fluid-filled tissues and bloodstream just as easily as they travel across the tightly stretched surface of a leather drum. In fact, acoustic vibrations actually travel nearly 5 times faster through the dense water of our cellular matrix than they do through the open air, turning the human body into a highly efficient conductor of sonic energy. This specific realization regarding fluid dynamics has led directly to some of the most shocking and cutting-edge medical applications of our modern time. Scientists and oncologists are no longer just studying the passive effects of sound. They are actively weaponizing it, using targeted, high-intensity acoustic frequencies to hunt down and destroy lethal diseases hidden deep within the dark cavities of the human body. By finding the exact resonant frequency of a specific pathogen or a dense cancer tumor, modern ultrasound machines can blast the malignant tissue with a targeted sound wave until the diseased cell literally shatters under the intense acoustic pressure. It is the exact same mechanical principle as the ancient healer violently shaking a rattle to break up dark, stagnant energy, now completely validated under the harsh light of an electron microscope. This undeniable scientific bridge connecting ancient indigenous ritual and modern clinical oncology has fundamentally altered how the global medical establishment currently views vibrational therapy. What was once easily dismissed by academics as primitive superstition or simple placebo is now the foundational science driving highly funded, non-invasive, focused ultrasound surgeries currently utilized in major research hospitals around the entire world. The enduring result of this research is a profound, permanent shift in clinical treatment protocols, effectively replacing steel surgical scalpels with invisible beams of concentrated sound. Today, targeted acoustic energy is officially recognized by the medical community as a powerful, highly measurable physical force entirely capable of manipulating human biology at the deepest, most fundamental cellular level. The realization that sound can literally alter human biology leaves a profound mark on the patients who experience these new therapies. For a woman lying in a sterile hospital room, hearing the gentle hum of a targeted acoustic machine dissolve a tumor, the boundary between ancient ritual and modern medicine simply vanishes. She does not just feel cured, she feels a deep, unsettling connection to the generations of healers who knew this truth long before the machines existed. The heavy burden of illness is lifted not by a cold scalpel, but by an invisible wave of energy, leaving families in quiet awe of the unseen forces that saved their loved ones. This shift in understanding triggered a quiet revolution far beyond the walls of any single hospital. In 2014, researchers at the University of Toronto began officially documenting the physiological changes in patients exposed to rhythmic drumming, mapping the exact moments when stress hormones plummeted. The clinical data proved what Indigenous elders had always stated as simple fact, forcing the rigid world of Western science to rewrite its own assumptions about how the human nervous system responds to vibration. The aftershock of these findings rippled through medical boards, demanding a new respect for practices once dismissed as mere folklore. Yet even as the clinical evidence piles up in pristine laboratories, a deep shadow of mystery remains over the true origin of these healing frequencies. When you stand in the dense, echoing expanse of the Amazon, the precise, complex rhythms sung by the shaman seem too perfect to have been discovered by trial and error alone. The unresolved question that haunts acoustic researchers is how these ancient cultures knew the exact frequencies required to trigger cellular repair without a single microscope. The scientific record can measure the result, but it cannot explain the source of this profound ancient wisdom. The durable consequence of this collision between old ways and new science is the birth of a completely new medical discipline known as vibroacoustic therapy. Major rehabilitation centers across the globe now mandate the use of low-frequency sound beds for trauma recovery, integrating the raw power of vibration directly into standard patient care. This institutional shift means that the rhythmic pulsing of sound is no longer an alternative fringe idea, but a heavily funded pillar of modern neuroscience. The system of healing has permanently expanded, recognizing that the human body is an acoustic instrument that requires tuning just as much as it requires chemical medicine. For the indigenous communities who held on to these songs through centuries of suppression, this modern validation brings a complex, often painful sense of vindication. Elders who were once punished for singing their sacred chants now watch as outsiders study their exact vocal patterns for medical breakthroughs. The aftermath is a fragile bridge between two worlds, where young tribe members are finally seeing the immense, undeniable value of their own heritage reflected in the eyes of the global scientific community. It is a quiet reclamation of power, as the songs that were almost erased are now recognized as keys to human survival. This reclamation sent a shockwave through the field of historical anthropology, completely shattering the assumption that early medicine was primitive or entirely plant-based. When global health organizations began acknowledging the undeniable psychological benefits of traditional sound healing, the entire narrative of human progress had to be adjusted. It became terrifyingly clear that we had spent centuries walking away from a profound understanding of the natural world, trading an intimate connection with acoustic energy for the cold isolation of modern symptom management. The realization that we lost something so vital leaves a lingering, heavy sense of grief for the knowledge that slipped through our fingers. As we try to piece together the fragments of this lost acoustic science, we are forced to confront the gaps in our own understanding of reality. We can record the songs, map the brainwaves, and measure the cellular response, but the actual mechanism of how human intention weaves into the sound wave remains entirely hidden in the dark. Can a machine ever truly replicate the healing power of a song if it lacks the human spirit of the singer who delivers it? This chilling uncertainty continues to frustrate researchers, suggesting that the ultimate secret of sound healing might be permanently locked away in the human soul, beyond the reach of any clinical trial. Despite this mystery, the undeniable power of these ancient frequencies has forced a permanent change in how we design healing spaces today. Modern hospitals are slowly abandoning the harsh, anxiety-inducing beeps of traditional monitors, replacing them with carefully engineered acoustic environments designed to calm the nervous system and promote deep rest. This architectural and cultural shift proves that the ancient understanding of sound has finally broken through the sterile walls of Western medicine. The enduring legacy of the chanting shamans is now built into the very rooms where we recover, ensuring that the healing power of vibration will touch millions of lives for generations to come. Ultimately, the journey from the deep rainforest to the modern hospital ward leaves us with a profound sense of shared humanity and a startling realization of our own fragility. For the everyday person walking out of a sound therapy session, the world suddenly feels less like a chaotic void and more like a carefully orchestrated symphony. They carry the lingering vibration in their chest, a quiet, protective armor against the relentless noise of the modern age. It is a deeply personal aftermath, a subtle but permanent rewiring of the mind that allows them to finally hear the ancient, steady heartbeat of the earth itself. Deep in the shadows of the ancient cedar forest, long after the final heavy strike of the elk-hide drum has faded into the freezing night air, the damp soil beneath the towering trunks still seems to hold a distinct physical hum. It is a quiet, haunting acoustic echo, a lingering vibration measuring precisely in the low frequency ranges known to stabilize human heart rates and alter brainwave states. This resonance serves as a chilling reminder of a brutal historical era when a single, disciplined human voice was the absolute only medical weapon our ancestors possessed against the encroaching dark of sudden illness, severe infection, or deep psychological trauma. Before the advent of modern pharmaceuticals or sterile surgical theaters, these rhythmic guttural chants and relentless drumbeats were deployed as literal acoustic warfare, reaching desperately into the unseen neurological depths to pull a fading, fragile human spirit back from the terrifying edge of permanent physical collapse.